I think she's muted.
She is muted.
Mute. Mute. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you guys. Let me see, hi Charlene. Hi Colton, they are from NBC. We're happy to have you guys here. I know that Cara just went over that disclaimer. They asked me to reread it. And so I want to go ahead and do that real quick for them. That's NBC's request. I'm going to find it in our group. Okay. We'd like to remind everyone that is here that we have a TV reporter and producer from NBC 10 Boston with us. We are recording this Zoom for potential use in a television segment or special. By you participating, whether it be by video, audio, or name and message via the chat function, you are affirming that you understand you may potentially appear in a television story or special on MPE stories and cultural and racial complexities around the issue. Is everybody okay with that? Good to go. All right. So as some of you guys know, my name is Alicia Weiss. I am a retired RN, Army veteran. I write a blog. And as several of you have heard, I've met I think I've met a lot of you in person. I was shocked in 2014 to discover that the man who had raised me was not my genetic father. And I also learned I was half Jewish. I was confirmed in the Lutheran church, so I grew up in a Christian household. It took me about 4 years of sleuthing to discover the identity of my biological father. Unfortunately, by the time I found him at the end of 2017, he was already had passed away. Right to Know manages 2 Facebook groups, the Pacific Northwest NPE Life, which really, we have a lot of folks from the West Coast on that in that group also. And we also manage the NPE Cross-Cultural Connections that most of you are familiar with. NPECC was created actually on January 1st, 2020 of this year to provide a safe space for us to discuss race and cultural issues. It is an inclusive intersectional support group for DNA NPE individuals. And it offers a safe space to share, process, give and receive feedback, pool resources, and have discussions about the full range of experiences, challenges, and emotions of the NPE journey. Some of the folks that helped me start that I know are here in the group, and I just want to mention a couple of those. I have Lisa Bailey here. She's one of our admin. She is soon to be a PhD student. She helps us on the background with the group. We have Giovanna Adams also here, and we'll hear more about her biography a little bit later on when she speaks. And Wendy, I'm not sure if Wendy's here, but Wendy is an author, and she's also one of the ones that helped create this group. We have Cara that's helped create the group also, and David, who's not here. David's on holiday. So we're going to have Colton join us. He's a TV and radio personality, most notably a correspondent on The Hub Today. It's a daily lifestyle show on NBC 10 Boston. He also co-hosts the Hub Today weekend show. Along with lifestyle programming, Colton has been tackling sensitive cultural and racial issues, including an interview recently with the Black Southwest Airline flight attendant who went viral after her in-flight conversation about race with the white CEO of American Airlines. Colton, hi, are you ready? You want to say hi?
Yeah, hi guys. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. And really quickly, Alicia, if I can say anything, how this all came to be with me is our producer, Charlene, who's on as well. She came to me with this the story of an NPE, and I had no clue, had never heard the term. It was completely over my head. And then as I kind of began to dive into the world of NPEs and it's the movement that it is, I began to learn all kinds of stuff and the resources that are out there. But then I also began to learn that there is an extra layer of complexity that I don't think people think about in terms of race that gets added on to some MPEs. So that's how I ended up in this chat with you guys today. So thank you again for the invitation to be here. I have lots of questions for you, so get ready.
Well, we will be. We're going to start with our first NPE. This is Erin. Erin lives in Budapest, Hungary. I'm happy to introduce you to her. She works as a conference interpreter in Europe. And I've had the pleasure of meeting this remarkable woman during my trip to Berlin, Germany in October and November. We were able to spend 2-3 nights together. We had a wonderful visit. Take it away, Erin.
Well, thank you. I hope I managed to unmute myself and everybody hears me well. Please bear with my accent because I'm not American. I think I'm one of the only ones who is from another continent, and it's past midnight here. And sorry that it's quite dark around me. So let me start my story. My name is Erin, and I live in Hungary in Central Europe. I was born in '78 in then Soviet Union, now Russia. My Russian Jewish mother married her Hungarian boyfriend when she found out that she was pregnant with me. But their marriage did not last long. They divorced when I was 2. My father returned to his home country, and I didn't see him until I was 9, when my parents decided to get back together again and move to Hungary. The relationship with my father did not go well. We did not bond, and I could never bring myself to call him dad. But I was glad to see that my sister, who was born when I was 12, was treated differently. She was the apple of her father's eye. I've always been intrigued by our family history and our Jewish legacy, so I was excited to receive a DNA test kit for my 40th birthday from my husband. I did the test together with my sister. So last year, on 15th of February, my life was divided into a before and after. The test results came back, and I learned that my sister was a half-sister. And instead of being half Jewish and half Hungarian like her, I was half Jewish from my mother, 1/4 Iberian, and 1/4 Native American. Now, believe me, having Native American genetic background in Europe is quite uncommon. I confronted my mother and learned that I was a result of a summer fling, but she couldn't remember the name of the young man or the country he was from. So I started an all-consuming search on the internet, reaching out to anyone who could give me further information. Eventually, after a 5 months search, I found a second cousin who gave me my father's name, and also I learned that he was Peruvian, living in the US. It took me 3 days to write a letter that would probably change a man's life. I sent it to his work email, no reply. I tried to find him on social media, but to no avail. One night I talked with a lady from an NPE group I joined, and she volunteered to reach out to my father on the phone on my behalf. Now that lady's name is Alicia Weiss, and I'm forever grateful she did that terrifying first step for me. And now I regularly exchange messages with my birth father. He remembered my mother and was shocked to learn that their encounter resulted in a child, me. We are working on getting used to the idea of having each other in our lives, and I think it takes compassion, patience, and willingness to explore this opportunity. And I try to remain hopeful. There are several emotionally draining aspects of being an NPE. Besides losing a father, half of our family, trust, sometimes our sanity, some of us lose their cultural heritage, ethnicity, and in a way, our identity too. I went to bed half Jewish, half Hungarian, and I woke up half Jewish, half Peruvian. It's difficult to explain how an unexpected discovery like this can erase all you thought to be true and valid about yourself and raise question marks you can't dismiss. And suddenly, at the age of 40, I questioned my identity and stared at my reflection in the mirror, looking for clues. I find it also very interesting that from an early age, I was intrigued by the Spanish language. I speak Spanish fluently, and I even lived in Spain for several years. So there's definitely an inclination and an affection towards this Hispanic culture, which is helpful in getting acquainted with my Peruvian heritage. As a result of this life-changing revelation, I definitely see family, ethnicity, and identity issues in a different light. When I first told someone I was half Peruvian, I felt like an imposter because I lacked the connection to the country. This sense of not belonging has diminished in the last recent couple of months. I'm in regular contact with some of my Peruvian family, and I'm gradually embracing my Peruvian self, taking in the culture one step at a time. I think we humans are not confined, but enriched by the numerous layers of our identity. So in my case, I'm proud to say that genetically speaking, I'm Ashkenazi Jewish, Iberian, and Native American. And culturally, I'm a Russian Jew, I'm Hungarian, also enriched by some newly discovered Peruvian. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
That was fabulous. Can you guys hear me? Am I being heard? Cara? Okay, good. Thank you so much, Erin. We're going to move on to our second NPE. Lisa is going to tell her story. She discovered that she's half Black, and that she was not fitting in while she was growing up. And this is an interesting part of her story. And so I'm going to let her start. She's actually works for community health care and lives in Philadelphia. And I also met Lisa at an NPE meetup in that wonderful city. Take it away, Lisa.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak today. So back in 2014, I ordered a DNA test through Ancestry.com because I wanted to know where my ancestors came from. My father was always told growing up that he was Irish, that we were from Ireland. So I thought it would be really fun for a Christmas gift to do our family tree. A couple weeks before Christmas, I was down visiting my parents, and I brought a box of pictures downstairs as my mother was making breakfast, and I asked her if she would help me go through the pictures because I wanted to know who some of my family was. And that's when she turned to me and she said, why are you doing this? And I said, well, I want to know where we came from, where are we from? And she said, you will never know who you are and where you came from. And I can't explain it, but my whole life flashed before my eyes, and it's like I just knew what she meant. And I went into shock, and so my first response was, did you steal me from the hospital? And she said, no, you are my daughter, but I'm not going to talk about this while he's still living, referring to my father who was asleep in another room. And then she said she didn't want to talk about it, and I left the room, and I just broke down. When I got back home that weekend, the DNA test was there. I ripped it open. I mean, I threw my bags down, ripped it open, did what I needed to do, sent it off. And about 6 weeks later, I got the email. I was sitting on the couch with my husband, and I go to the ethnicity section, and the first word I see in bold letters is Africa. And it was almost like a relief. And I laughed a little bit because, I kind of turned to my husband, who's white, and I said, did you know you married a Black woman? I mean, I didn't know what to say. I mean, and I say relief, meaning I spent my entire life defending who I thought I was. And it was just exhausting because people would just stare at me or make comments and ask me, what are you? And I got that my entire life. So it was kind of a relief. I confronted my mother. I called her, and she completely denied the results when I told her, it said 38%. I mean, I grew up in the South, so 38% is not a result from a slave owner. It's pretty significant. And she denied it. And any question I asked, she just would deny it. She broke down at the end of the conversation. She was terrified that my father would find out and kill her, and that it would destroy the family. So I took it. I basically respected her for about 4 years, and in the meantime, I tried to do my own research, and looking in DNA, matches, and trying to figure out who this guy was. And after 4 years, my dad was sick with cancer, and I knew he wasn't doing well. So I finally gave it one more shot, and I said to my mother, "It's time. I need you to come forward." So she agreed. And then when we were down there again, it was almost exactly 4 years to the day. She explained to me that she had had an affair with this man, and that he had also had an affair, and he had two children. And it was knowing that, whether it was an affair and not, anything like an assault or anything, that I really felt that I wanted to meet this person. So she gave me her blessing, and I sent him a letter in the middle of January. And by the 2 weeks later, he gave me a call. And it was just, he said to me, that he suspected that he had another child out there. He wasn't sure, but he did say to me that he had said a prayer a couple weeks before that, that if he had any other children out there, that God would give him a sign. And then he received my letter. So at that moment, I realized that this man really wants to have, it's possible he wants to have a relationship with me. And I asked him, and I said, "Does this mean you want to get to know me?" And he says, "Yes." So for about, I would say about a month or two, he would call me like a gentleman, like about every other day, to get to know me. And then he introduced me to my siblings, and we talked one by one. And then within 3 months of that initial phone call, I was down and meeting my entire family. And it was just, it was just so surreal. They embraced me. And by the end of the weekend, they were like, "We love you, you're a part of our family." It was just amazing. And, the MPE story, that was traumatic enough, finding out that my father raised me wasn't my father, but just the other layer of knowing that I was a completely different race was, to me, almost more emotional, and just trying to figure out, what that meant to me. And I did a lot of research, and I talked to other people of color, and I just really embraced it and wanted to learn about my culture. And once I started to open my eyes and really embrace it, I started experiencing racism. And that was just, for me, not growing up in a home with, two parents of different races. It was much harder for me to control some of my emotions because I wasn't raised as a Black woman. So there was joy, and then there was these challenges. And, I started to, identify myself as a person of color, biracial, Black woman. I mean, all of those apply to me. And whether or not I was raised in a multicultural home or not, to me, I am a person of color. That's how I present myself. That's who I am, regardless of not knowing, that part of me. To me, it's just a part of me. It's who I am. So, I mean, there's many layers to my story, but that's the basic, gist of my journey as an MP.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. Right now, we're going to put on a short video of Albert Franz. He lives in Vienna, Austria. It's very late there in Europe, so he recorded a video for us on his donor-conceived story, his identity journey. Albert is actually a TED talker, a TED speaker. He's just fascinating. He is an American concert pianist, and he's living in Vienna. We'll post a link to his TED Talk in 2015 on identity being a human right in the chat. When this video finished, we're going to have Colton start us off with a question. Cara, go ahead.
My name's Albert. I'm a pianist. My family name Franz comes from the Germanic tribe, the Franks, who settled what became France. Turns out the country of France is named after the tribe, the Franks. But it turns out I was made in a lab and I'm Jewish, so I guess that makes me Frankenstein. But as a product of the reproductive technology industry, that's how I often feel. Sometimes I joke that I used to be a quarter Irish and now I'm half Jewish. But there's a serious message beneath the quip. What does it mean to discover one's true identity late in life, or even to have to search for your own identity? And what happens when we find it? Shortly before I turned 30, I discovered I was so-called donor conceived. He's not your father, I was told. That's what I thought, I replied. Even when you don't know, you know. The rest took me by surprise, though. Your father is a medical doctor. A couple of tantalizing details was all that I had. A fertility clinic in Philadelphia. My mother was reassured that the donor was a medical doctor. And for years after that, that's all I knew about half of me. I wasn't even supposed to know that much. 5 years after I found out I was donor conceived, I had a reconciliation with my mother who did confirm these details, but she had no further information. But now that things were out in the open, my social father and I could accept each other for the first time in our lives. This was the Hollywood ending, or so I thought. We got along for a few short years, though we didn't exactly live happily ever after. In a Skype call one Saturday, I shared that I was advised to take a DNA test. I had just gotten the results. It turns out I'm half Jewish. He didn't even wait a single second. You've always held on to a buck like a Jew. I tried to dismiss the remark as, quote, dad's humor, but truth be told, it cut deep. Now, Hitler's country, where I live, within walking distance of former concentration camps, is quite a place to discover that you're Jewish. Here in Vienna, monuments and reminders of the war and its decimation of the Jewish people are omnipresent. They're really everywhere. There's a monument on practically every other street corner to murdered Jews. And it was a harrowing thought. Had I lived here in my grandparents' generation, the Nazis would have come knocking on my door and taken me to a concentration camp, not for anything that I believed, but just for my ethnicity. So one day, 2 years ago, I got an email that the results of my latest DNA test were in. I nervously logged on. My closest match was at the top of the list. Possible range: parent, child, immediate family member, confidence extremely high, relationship, his username, is your father. Now, even just saying these words right now, my heart is just pounding out of my chest once again. Never has finding yourself meant more than when finding your own parent, your own missing family, and with it, your own identity. So I'm a pianist. My father, turns out, is a hand surgeon. We have the same hands. My grandmother was a pianist, and there's even a photo of her playing Chopin. And incredibly, the family moved to Pennsylvania from Vienna, Austria. Now, all the things in common with my newfound family, not just appearance, but interest and hobbies and the way we communicate, the way we think, mannerisms, personality, beliefs, even our deepest values rise to the level of separated twins' weirdness. And gratefully, my new family welcomed me with open arms. And we celebrated my birthday and Thanksgiving and Hanukkah all at once. So after 43 years, I finally found the family I never knew I had. And I was home.
Wow, he's so eloquent. Go ahead, Colton. You have a question you want to ask either anyone or a speaker in specific?
I do. I think I want to start overall, just with a show of hands, because I can see everyone right now. Raise your hand if throughout this journey, throughout this process, you felt like you had an identity crisis at any point. Yeah. How did it change your sense of self? When I ask that, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? How did it initially change your sense of self?
Caroline?
I would say for me, I thought I was English and my parentage and maybe a little bit of Scotch or Welsh. And I found out my father was 100% Lebanese. So instantly I became, it kind of validated a lot of that. And it brought me some peace. I would say at first it was like I had peace because it just all fit everything throughout my whole life. I had 6 other siblings in my house and they always said I was different, and it kind of just fit. And I thought, well, all the different parts I attribute now to my biological father, who I never got to meet, but, I found out a lot about him through his family. So it's like the things that aren't my mother in me, I now know are my father, and it fits because it was never my father that raised me that I ever identified with. I'm tall, he was short, he had blue eyes, I have brown eyes. Everything was a polar opposite. How can you pass off a blue-eyed blonde to a Lebanese girl? It just never fit, and I never fit. So it brought me peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Raise your hand if you feel like it has changed your perception of your place in the world. Explain that feeling to me. Lisa, can you explain that?
Let me let Danica go. I think I saw her hand first, if you don't mind. Danica? I don't hear you.
All right, sorry, I had to figure out my screen. So for me, I knew something was off when my mother tested and we saw her European ancestry and mine was more than hers. My mother was 22% European and I was 27%. And it was the weirdest feeling I had. So I'm almost the inverse of Lisa's story. And there were all these European ancestry and it made absolutely no sense. It was a total shock. I had no idea, I was absolutely unprepared for this. And in a way, things started making sense, but I looked at people more as my brothers and sisters because I'm like, man, I'm more connected to people than I realized that I was before. So it kind of had a positive effect that I wasn't expecting, but it was, like I said, I felt more connected to people and while at the same time feeling like I had no idea who I was. So there were 2 things. I had severe cognitive dissonance. That's the best way that I can explain it.
How about you, Lisa?
Yeah, that sounds right. Some people actually think that I suspected this, and I didn't. On the outside, you could look at me and my siblings and say, we look like night and day. But when you're on the inside and it's your parents and you believe what I had no idea. I knew people would say, like, ask me, are you Hispanic? Are you Hawaiian? Are you, Egyptian? And all this stuff. And, as an adult, I thought it was fun, especially living in Philly when I was, all over the city, going to meetings at schools for kids with disabilities. And I was like, oh, I blend in anywhere. But it was a shock to me as well, because I honestly had no idea. I mean, you know, I mean, people would say to me, and it's hurtful, but I have friends that say, oh, we knew something was right, or you always looked exotic, but I honestly had no idea. So it was really a shock, but it was relieving as well. It's just, it's hard to explain. I mean, because my entire identity, I mean, my whole race changed. I mean, my entire, everything I knew, you know, was just not the same. It's really, you know.
Hey, Lisa, I actually want to touch on something in part of your story too. You said that finding out the race and the culture part of your background, that was a more emotional experience than the paternal news that you got, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this. There was just something, I was never daddy's little girl. My sister was. I just never felt close to him. I actually didn't even have him walk me down the aisle when I got married. It's just not in a mean way. It's just I was never close with him. And I grew up in the South. So my dad was very prejudiced. He would make remarks. I wasn't allowed to spend the night at my friends' houses if they were Black. Like, I went through all of that. And so you grow up in that. And, you know, you're taught that being different or being a different color is wrong. And he was the one who would specifically always talk about my hair. It looks like a mop. Like, I like your hair straighter. And like it, I don't think he knew, but I think something down inside, just looking at me and thinking I could, you know, look, I wasn't, you know, obviously there was something about me that wasn't normal to him, you know? So it was just very, it was, yeah, I love my dad. You know, he never knew. He died last year. He never knew. I was never going to break his heart. But I just was I never felt close to him. There was something missing.
Yeah. Have you embraced your new identity?
Yes, very much.
How so?
Very much so. I definitely, you know, I identify myself as a Black woman. And again, like I said in my story, I mean, whether I say I'm a person of color, biracial, I have really, everything that's happened in this country with George Floyd and all the injustice and systemic racism has really hit me. And I can see both sides. I really can. I grew up with a white family. I understand that side of it. But I think it is harder to be Black and have a white family and explain what's going on and to educate them. I still get offended, and I know that people mean well, but for me, I get racisms on both sides. I mean, I'm not Black enough, I'm not white enough. I experience it in all types of forms. So it's really, you know, trying to control, like I said, like control some of my emotions and not go off on somebody, you know, on the street, you know. But just to, I still educate myself. I talk to people of color and I ask them, you know, like, is this normal? You know, how, and it's hard because, you know, I don't want to offend anybody, but it's like, I'm like this little baby who's learning about this, you know, my identity, and I just want to learn, you know. So, yeah.
Danica, really quickly before we move on, can you, just so I have a good answer for TV in case we use it, can you break down the European ancestry that you were talking about?
Well, mostly British, but there is some, oh my gosh, it's something that was absolutely ridiculous, like, not Scandinavian, Ukraine. I was like, what in the world? And that wasn't on my mother's DNA list. And I had more, there was like 1% Greek, but there was more European ancestry on my ethnicity list than my mother's. And I'm like, who I always believe my phone, like there's this Ukrainian, British, Russian, Turkey. It was just a weird jumble that didn't make sense. And it wasn't a lot, but 27% was pretty significant. That's more than a quarter. And I'm like looking at myself like something isn't right with this picture.
We're losing her. Are you guys having trouble hearing her?
Yeah, I can't hear, but.
Danica, we can't hear you very good. We're gonna keep going on, moving on.
Yeah, if you guys want to carry on with more stories too, I still have some more questions for each of you as we go on.
Cara, do you have anything any questions you had? Anybody have a question?
Keep going. All right, I'm trying to mute Danica, but I can't mute her. I'm gonna try mute all.
Okay.
Okay. I think everyone's muted but me now. Of course, we could have questions forever, but we're gonna keep going. Our next person, our next MPE is Giovanna. Giovanna lives in Connecticut, so not too far from you guys, Colton. And she's the co-founder of Cultural Cross Connections and the CEO of HB4 Diversity, Inc. Giovanna?
Hi, thank you, Kara. So I like to say that I'm still kind of in the middle of my story. So my story starts in 2016 when my mother, kind of out of the blue, decided to confess the secret of my paternity. And I, at that point, was told that the man who raised me, who I hadn't really been very close to, was not my biological father. This was a secret that had been kept from me for 45 years. My birth certificate father was white, and so I also knew that I didn't look like either side of my family. I'm an only child. I, at least at that time, didn't have any siblings. So I only really had my mother and my birth certificate father to look to for my identity. So I always kind of had questions about my ethnicity anyway. So once I found out that that information, I knew that a DNA test was going to be kind of the best way for me to figure out my ethnicity. And, you know, and I will say that I don't think I was as shocked that he wasn't my birth certificate father. I think I kind of clung more to finding out who I was through ethnicity. However, it took me about 2 years before actually doing the test. You know, and I know my husband and lots of people around me who kind of knew what was going on kept saying, why don't you do this test? Why don't you do this test? But I had so many people around me who had done the test just for fun and were able to find out different things about themselves and be excited about it. And I wanted to kind of have that same experience to find out I was this, that, or the other, and really be able to be excited about finally knowing my ethnicity. So when I finally did the test, my mother had shared with me some details about my biological father, one being that he was Cape Verdean. So when I finally did my test, and I had gotten back the information, I found out I was about 73–74% Cape Verdean. Which would also mean my mother is part Cape Verdean and also doesn't know that. So on December 27th in 2018, I pretty much woke up as an only child and then went to bed finding out that I have 5 other siblings and 9 nieces and nephews. Unfortunately, 2 of my siblings passed away. 2 of my older brothers passed away, one from actually police violence. But one of my siblings, my oldest sister, had also taken the DNA test, and it connected us right away as half siblings. And I was able to reach out to her. I really haven't been able to develop any kind of relationship with the other siblings, with the exception of my older brother. We kind of keep in contact and talk. So I'm hoping at some point my sisters will be a little more accepting of me and we'll be able to get to know each other. But, you know, for me, finding out that I was Cape Verdean, I had always thought that I was biracial and being part Black, part white. And finding out that I was able to find out right down to the exact island that I come from in the Cape Verdes, for me was a big deal, because I think most of the time for Black women, Black people, you're really not able to find out exactly where you come from. In DNA tests, you might get different areas in Africa, but you don't get to know that exact spot. So that gets very confusing. But for me, I'm able to find out that I'm from the island of Brava in Cape Verdean. So that to me was exciting. And, you know, I don't know where my story is going to end up ending, but I've been having fun learning about the language of Cape Verdean, the food, different things like that, and just kind of embracing that. And not so much, you know, having to fixate on the issues of my father. And I actually left out that I found out my biological father had passed away as well. So there really wasn't a whole lot of me being able to connect to him or that side of my family. But again, I hope at some point I'll get to know him through other family members that I have yet to meet.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Next, we have Jason. Are you? Hi.
Hey.
How are you?
Good yourself.
Jason lives in Washington and Vancouver, so on the bottom half of the state. I live in Seattle area. He's originally from Ketchikan, Alaska, if I read correctly.
Yeah.
And he works as a trash collector with Waste Management. Go for it, Jason.
Alrighty. Well, my story starts December 2018. I get a call from my aunt, and she said, "Hey, you know, I'm doing the finding out our heritage. You know, I was wondering if you and Jen wanted to take a test." I said, "Yeah, you know, that's cool, you know." And she's like, I'm like, you know, Jen and I were talking about doing it for a Christmas gift anyways. And she's like, "Well, here you go." So February comes around. I'm at work. It was a Tuesday morning. I get the results, and I'm looking, and I'm expecting to see, you know, some Lebanese and English and Irish off my dad's side, and then my mom's full Hispanic, so Hispanic on and Mexican off the other side. I'm looking, and I'm like, you know, I see it's like 68% Mexican, Hispanic, and then there's some Spanish and Portuguese in there. And I'm like, that's weird. You know, I should have some Lebanese or something in there. And then I look at the connections, and it was no one that I knew. And I knew all my aunts and uncles took it off the Snook side. So anyways, my sister, who knew I was taking the test, wanted to see the results, and her and my brother have a different dad already, so we knew that. But anyway, so I sent her a screenshot, and like a couple minutes later I get a phone call, and she's like, "Jason, do you know what this means?" I'm like, I don't know. He's not my dad. And she's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "No, it's just a DNA test. You know, who knows? Like, what if they mixed it up?" And I'm like, you know, I don't have time to deal with this. I'm at work. So anyway, so she asked if she can do some research, and I'm like, yeah. So I looked at my list of relatives, and I messaged a couple of people. I gave them some information. They said, "Oh yeah, we have people from, you know, Arizona move up, or Texas move up to that area of Sacramento. Here's their surnames. Here's everything." Well, within 48 hours, my sister found out who my dad was, and she sent me she sent me a picture, and I looked at it. And I'm like, oh man, like that's my dad. Like I was like, you know, that's anyways, so she sent me that picture. I'm like, I look just like that guy. This is crazy. There's no freaking way, you know? Anyway, she's like, you need to have a chat with mom. I'm like, okay. So I called mom, said, hey, can we talk Saturday? We go over there, and it was, I sat down, told her the story, and she just sits back and she goes, yeah. And I'm like, what? Like, yeah. And she's like, well, and my sister goes, well, we know who it is. Do you? And my mom goes, of course you know who it is, because my sister is like, step out of the way. Let me explain how I did this within 48 hours. You know, my brother-in-law called me. He's like, dude, she hasn't fed the kids. She hasn't done anything within the last 2 days. He was joking. But anyway, so she's like, yeah, I was with your dad, but we were on a breakup, and one thing led to another. And, that's it. And anyway, so she's like, I've went to his mom's funeral. Like, come find out they're really close. The families were really close back in the day. Both grandparents hung out with each other. godfathers and godparents of each other's kids. Anyway, so oh shoot, sorry, I'm just drawing blank here. Anyway, so she calls him, you know, a couple days later on Tuesday. That was a Saturday. A couple days later on Tuesday, she calls me in the morning and says, "Here's his number. He wants to talk to you. Just give him till next weekend. Let you know it's a big thing, you know." And so I'm like, okay, yeah. So within a couple hours, I get Facebook messages from his wife. How come we haven't met you? You know, how come you haven't called us? And I was like, holy cow. So I called later that night, and it's been amazing ever since. I mean, we have this crazy connection. It's been a year. We've seen each other 6 times. I'm flying out tomorrow morning to go visit them. You know, and it's been on both sides, the Snook side and the Wahardo side, both, you know, have just taken it so, I couldn't have asked for 2 more loving families to be a part of for this whole journey, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's just been crazy. I don't know. And, you know, and my whole family, my wife and 2 kids are looking at changing our last name to Wahardo now. So it's been over a year. So we've had an amazing connection.
That's a great story. I love the fact that you're saying you have 2 loving families to take this journey with you. I know all of us hope for that outcome. I'm going to take a second to tell my story, and then we'll go back to questions. We were hoping to have Bruce or David talk about their stories, but both of them are on vacation and didn't make it back in time. So I'm going to tell my story. As I mentioned, I started my MPE journey 2.5 years ago. I purchased a DNA kit for my dad and myself for Christmas in 2018, because through genealogical research, I learned that our ancestors came over, they were 3 slave brothers sold in Texas. And like Giovanna was saying, it's hard to know where, you know, there's no way to know from before that. And I really wanted to know where in Africa they were from. I envisioned an African trip, and I find your roots to be very important. So I grew up thinking I was biracial, but that meant I did have to fight for my identity most of my life, because I was just a shade too dark for my family, for my mother's side of the family, and not quite dark enough for my father's side of the family. And I didn't look like anybody on any side of the family. And just like Lisa was saying, people were constantly saying, "What are you?" I was constantly having to answer that question growing up. I think unless you're someone of some ambiguous ethnicity, you don't understand how often people actually ask you that question. And of course, they thought I was Greek or Middle Eastern. Yep, I see you, Stephanie, ravings in your hand. Yeah, it's interesting how much, I mean, just before COVID, I was out and an adult asked me that question. I was just kind of surprised by it. Anyway, I would ask them to guess. I kind of played with it. I think like Lisa was saying, it was sort of entertaining to me. I think once somebody actually said, "Are you half Black?" And after I would tell them, "Well, I'm half Black," they would stop and pause. And I don't know if anybody else experienced this. And then they would get this kind of embarrassed look on their face, and they would ask me, "Oh, I hope I've never said anything that's offensive to you." And I was always thinking, why does it matter that I'm half Black now that it would be offensive now? It should have been offensive beforehand. Sometimes they wouldn't believe me, and I would show them a picture of my dad, which didn't really relieve their doubts, because I have to admit, well, I always thought he was my dad. There were times in my childhood I would pull out pictures of both my parents and kind of squint at them and go, maybe I look like both of them, maybe, trying to make myself look like them because I didn't look like anyone. But I also got comments from the other side of the family too, that I wasn't dark enough to really understand what it means to be a person of color, because I could sort of skate through life being entitled due to the light complexion of my skin. But I did grow up hearing the stories of racism that my family experienced. So for example, my grandmother was in Oklahoma, and she wasn't allowed into this diner, and it was a huge snowstorm, and she almost died from freezing to death outside. My cousins were constantly stopped by the police just for the color of their skin. And I experienced racism myself. I've been spat on. I've been slapped across the face. I've been called zebra Oreo, half calf. I'm sure there's more that I can't remember. So I had these experiences for myself, and they definitely have woven into who I am. I identified as a biracial person. But when I received my DNA results, all that was taken away, you know, with a click of a mouse, which I'm sure everybody here can understand. I had 0 African DNA. Even my husband, who's lily white, he has like 1% African DNA. I have 0. I'm 50% Ashkenazi Jew. And I know you all know this feeling where you kind of go numb. It's mind-boggling. It's so hard to process. I couldn't look in the mirror for weeks. Like, I ducked out. And if I did happen to see myself, I'd be like, who is that? You are a complete stranger to yourself. And I went through that period. It took about 6 months for me to identify who my birth father was. I just want to say it's kind of like a living hell. My heart goes out to people who still haven't found their biological father, because I can't imagine living in that state for any long period of time. I know you get used to your own situation, but for me, I was just devastated by not knowing who I was anymore. Definitely was a huge identity struggle for myself. But once I did figure out who he was, he is deceased, and unfortunately, his family doesn't want any contact with me, but I have been able to read about him and have pictures of him. And so now I know where I look just like him. So I know where my eyes come from, my smile, and a lot of my personality traits that my mother was like, I have no idea why you're like that. It's now understandable. Some of my friends, when I tell them about my DNA story, they say to me, I knew you weren't half Black. And I have to say that that's probably one of the most hurtful things that people say to me. I know it's an innocent reply, but it reminds me so much of the identity that I've lost. It reminds me of the struggles I have in trying to identify who I am now, in trying to rebuild my identity. I've been going to temple, and I've been reading and talking to other Jewish people as much as possible, so I can try to build.
I made it the way I tapped.
Oh, muted. So I can rebuild who I am. Being an MPE, I think, changes everything about how you see yourself, and it shatters your sense of identity. And we can all pick up those pieces, but we can never put them back together the same way. So that's my story. Colton, do you have any specific questions you want to ask?
I have a few. How many of you felt like you had to grieve your identity? So, Cara, can you break down for me what the process of grieving your identity feels like?
So it's been, like I said, 2.5 years. Some days are harder than other days. I don't know how long ago it was. I had to go fill out a form. I was volunteering as a CASA. It's a court-appointed advocate for children, and I needed to put my race down. And I sat there, and the options are Caucasian, biracial, African, the list. And in the past, I would have checked biracial, but this time I couldn't. I would have felt like a fake, or I was lying. But I really didn't identify with white. I for 44 years, I didn't see myself as a white woman. So I had to leave the class and the room. I could not stay there. Yeah.
I'm curious for anyone, this is a deeper question, but I want to lean in on it. Did this give anyone a different perspective on privilege?
If she hears you, she mutes me.
Carolyn?
Okay. I kind of have an odd situation in that when I discovered my family, my new birth family, I discovered that they're extremely wealthy. So only one of my new 4 siblings really wants to have anything to do with me. So that made me feel less than, and it made me feel, I would have been the oldest of a total of 5 children. And I still haven't met with my new brother yet, the only one that will have anything to do. But I find that his children, which are now my niece, my nephew, my new nephew, he has embraced me. And I think it's this younger generation that is a little more open about it. And I just feel such a connection with them. But I kind of feel shamed by my new family in that I'm not kind of good enough for them, or that I'm trying to take their money, or, I've had to put that out there that we do fine. I'm not after a financial gain. I just wanted to find out his medical questions and find out his personality traits and things that I just never knew. And so it's kind of, I think I'm a little hesitant to meet my one brother that's willing to meet me, because I'm not sure if he just wants to meet me because he's trying to do what's right, not necessarily what's in his heart. And I'm pretty stubborn in that, I have a lot of pride too. I don't necessarily want to just put myself out there. I think I bring enough to the table that I don't have to. And I'm a victim in all this as well as anybody else, I think that's the thing I'm struggling with in this whole MPE thing, is that the families that don't want to reconnect with you. And it's like, wait a minute, what? I was just a child that was born. That's what I did wrong. So it's just really, I'm not quite there yet where I want to meet him, but I'm going to be 67. So I don't have forever. I got to do this. So, I've got to make peace with it one way or another.
Has this complicated any of your relationships with your family that you know and that you love?
My siblings that I grew up with, my mother, had 6 marriages and 7 children by 3 men, 3 of the fathers that we thought. Then I found out that I was by an affair. And then after I found out, my older brother found out that he was by another affair that my mother had had. And he's already met that family. So I would say my 6 siblings and I, we're the core that will always accept each other. Even though we're all halves, I don't have any full siblings anymore. This MPE took that away from me. But I feel like I will always be a unit with them because we've gone through so much in our childhood together. So that's what I hold dear to my heart.
I want to jump back to one specific question before we go back to some stories. And this question is actually for Jason. So right. Jason, you said something that really struck a positive nerve for me that I was like, wow, you said that you're taking your biological father's last name.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Why did you decide to do that?
I don't know. It was just like, we had such a good connection, and we've like, I can't tell you, like, I mean, after the first time I met him, we've been together, we were together for a couple of days, and I was already joking with him, like, hey, I get back pay for, all the allowances that I've done, how come you haven't paid me for, it's just joking around like that. And and it's just, we said we love each other after, like, because we spent so much, like a month and a half on the phone every single day. And when we got together, our kids, like, my kids just clicked with him and my stepmom. And I don't know, it's just, after a while I was like, wow, this is crazy, right? And I just felt like, we did it on Facebook to see what it would feel like. And it was just, we were gonna do Snook Wahardo, hyphen our last names, just my wife and I. And then the boys, we were gonna do Wahardo because I've been a Snook for 36 years and my wife's been one for 15 years. So, and then my son was like, no, I want the same last name as you guys. It's not fair. So we said, okay, we'll just change it to Wahardo, you know? And so, yeah, that's how it is. And we're really excited and they're really excited. And, and like I said, the Snook side, they're such nice, caring, loving people. They're just like, you know what, we're excited for you. We're happy for you. They added my dad on Facebook, you know? Yeah. So my birth certificate father's family added my biological father on Facebook, you know? And no, it's just been a crazy connection, and it's been an awesome, smooth transition. And like I said, I couldn't have asked for two better families, because the Wahardos have been, the first day I met my dad, the next day I met all his brothers and sisters and my cousins, and it's just, you know, everyone was just so warm and welcoming, open arms, and you know, it was just like, not only that, but come to find out, you know, like I said, like, come to find out that my mom's side and my biological father's side, both my grandparents hung out growing up together, and like I said, they're each other's godfathers to their kids, to each other's kids. Anyways, but I don't know, it's just a weird, crazy connection, you know.
So I'm also adding Rubenstein as my birth father's last name, and they have no connection with me at all. And my husband and I actually chose a different last name so we wouldn't have hyphenated names. But I want to have that as part of my identity because for 44 years I didn't. So that can cut across different ways for different meanings for people. Is there anyone else here who's changing their last name?
Well, I was just going to say, I kind of am doing the opposite. When I got married, I originally hyphenated my last name with my birth father's last name and my husband's name. And I'm now getting rid of the birth father's name so that it will just be the one last name, Adams.
If you see on my name, my actual last name is not Leslie, but in everything that I do in public, it is Leslie. My birth father was a Tippy, and then after I made my discovery, I knew that my biological father was a Leslie. And so everything on Facebook, everything in my business, everything that I do with the Angels, it's all Laura Leslie. But by law, I'm my husband's wife, so I carry his name legally. And in this state, I will not be able to change my name and add like a different person to my birth certificate or anything. So I probably will not go legally and do that.
Really quickly, Cara, I feel like this is a great segue into this. Can you break down right to know and what you guys are working on as it pertains to birth certificates?
So that's a hard question. I can tell you the law a little bit. And then Cassandra wants to comment on your question about privilege. Changing your birth certificate everywhere requires a court order. It is not an easy thing to do. Each state is different. You can change your name. When my husband and I lived in North Carolina and we decided on a family name, we went to the judge there and the judge said, honey, you can change your name, but your husband cannot. And we weren't allowed to until we came to Washington, and we were nervous about it. And the judge here was like, oh, you can change your name to Zeus. We don't care in Washington. So changing your name depends often on where you live, if you'll be allowed to do it. That does not change the name on your birth certificate, though. To do that, you have to get a court order, and changing your paternity or your either way also requires a court order. I eventually hope to see birth certificates using Right to Know to advocate for this with 4 spaces on it. One for the genetic mother, one for the genetic father, and then I'm not sure there's agreed term of art yet, but supporting parent 1 and supporting parent 2 could be 2 men, 2 women, the people who are legally and financially responsible for you. Ultimately, I think all of us who are MPEs, donor conceived, even my mother, who her biological father died when she was 9 months old, her mom remarried and the man adopted her like normal, her stepfather. So that did change her birth certificate. And if nobody had ever told her about her birth fathers and she was so young, she would have never known because her birth certificate had been changed. So I think that having those 4 lines on a birth certificate would help people in all sorts of instances be able to maintain that genetic connection and knowledge, which is so key important. Alicia hasn't brought this up for her, but there's instances when you don't know your genetic background where it could really save your life.
Mm-hmm.
Giovanna, do you want to go ahead and comment like you wanted to? I mean, not Giovanna, I'm sorry, Cassandra.
Yes, thank you guys. So I heard your question about privilege, and it resonated with me, and I just wanted to speak a little bit about that. As far as there's kind of 2 ways that this experience has really kind of transformed my view of privilege, and one is like some people have mentioned, like Alicia has mentioned, like Albert mentioned, I found out through DNA testing that I was half Ashkenazi Jewish, like Kara also. My mother is Italian American, but my father's is very American, very English and Dutch, and that very American mix. And so that side, that very white side being replaced by Ashkenazi Jewish was a very big cultural shift for me. And there were a couple instances that really played into the feeling about privilege with that. And one is the shooting in Pittsburgh, which happened, just months after I found my own discovery. And also once I had started delving into it, and I don't go to just one synagogue. I live in New Jersey, and I kind of synagogue hop with friends and visit different places, different events. So seeing that I had been to, over a dozen synagogues within the span of my discovery, and how they were being targeted, and that feeling of it really could have been me, in a place that was targeting me specifically for my ethnicity, was a completely new feeling for me. And it is something that I feel, as a very empathetic person, I still could not have envisioned the depth of that feeling prior to this discovery. I don't think it's possible to understand unless you experience it, how it feels having your physical body targeted for your ethnicity. And also just recently in December, there was a mass shooting in the city that I live in Jersey City, New Jersey, where a kosher market was the site and the target of a mass shooting. And it's 2 miles from my house. And I walk my daughter to school every day, and we pass a Jewish school, a Jewish daycare for young kids, and there were police in front of it every day for months, at least 2 months after the shooting. So right in my face, walking my daughter to school every day was a reminder that I could be targeted for my ethnicity, and especially, as many here can attest to, when you grow up and people can see your physical features and you're stereotyped. I found out that I was donor conceived, and so my parents, my mother and my dad, who raised me, did not know what my ethnic background was. And one of the first things my mother said to me when I got my DNA test results was, "I always thought you were Jewish." And I have never had the guts to fully discuss how traumatic that was, hearing that from my mother, who was my best friend. To also touch on your question about family. But that statement would be purely based on stereotypes of what I looked like or my behavior, ways in which I was different from my family. Why would my mother think of me as Jewish? It's purely those stereotypes. So thinking there were points throughout my life where I was stereotyped that way. And it really messes with you. It really messes with you. And the other point of privilege that I've kind of been able to pick apart and empathize with more more as a result of this experience is the specific experience of being donor conceived, because unlike some other NPE experiences where, you know, there's a one night stand, it's kind of an accidental tryst, or for donor conceived, it's planned out. Like even before I was conceived, my parents were intending to lie to me. So it's like the whole lie was, even prior to my existence, planned out. And so it's just hammered home this message of really like conception discrimination, that based on the way you were conceived, whether it's, you know, through a artificial insemination, whether it's through an affair, whether it's rape, that by virtue of the way you're conceived, you are less than. You are not entitled to know medical information. You are not entitled to know your ethnicity. You're just, people feel entitled to tell you get away from them without even knowing. I said people are nicer to their neighbors. You know, if your neighbor knocked on your door and said, hey, would you like to be friends? That would be fantastic. You knock on a biological relative's door and ask to be friends, and it's immediate kind of discrimination just because you're a biological family member that they don't know, and that your conception makes you less than. So those were really the 2 points of, you know, on a cultural level, and then also this kind of societal discrimination against us for how we came to be. Those were the big points that have been life-changing, quite frankly, in a good way, in a sense, because it's with the world we live in now, it's better to fully understand privilege and how it operates in our society. So thank you. It's also very hard for families to kind of comprehend this. It's so we thank you for listening. And
thanks, Cassandra. Sebastiana, who's on the Right to Know's board as well, has something to contribute.
So I'm never going to get a chance to second somebody in the donor conceived and Jewish heritage crowd. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, because I have pretty much a very similar story to Cassandra. We have the exact same background, probably a few differences, but for the most part, her story is my story as well, which is, I thank God every day that I have somebody to walk that path with, and that, you know, having not found any siblings and being donor conceived as well, it has been wonderful to have Cassandra, who's gone through many of the same things. One thing that she didn't mention, but I know that she also has felt, is the depth of the experiencing the Holocaust. And I myself, I went to Europe for some work, and then after that, I went to the shtetl that my bio great grandmother escaped from prior to the Holocaust, and that was really moving for me. And you know, everything she spoke about being just absorbing and having this culture come into your life. I've also made Jewish religion part of my life, but I've done it more traditionally in the sense that I converted. But when I went to these towns and I heard the stories, it became so real for me. And it was something that I never really understood as a non-Jew. And I can say that it's part of my mission now, I suppose, to explain a little bit more, because I understand what it is like to really not connect with that. I did that for the first 25 years of my life. My mother told me I was donor conceived at age 25. So that's where I'm coming into the knowledge. And then I learned I was Jewish at age 35. And so I've known for a while now. And I also, you know, besides the Jewish issues, I think that, you know, just being donor conceived has been very challenging in the sense of the extended family, something that Cassandra touched on. I have not been accepted by my bio father's extended family, he's not accepted by them either, which may have something to do with it. But it's definitely been very challenging, and you come to it with that level of stigma, and it really is such a stigma that needs to be fought against, but it's impossible to know where to start, and I still don't know, but I know that just internalizing, where I am and being grateful for that is been the most helpful on my journey thus far. So I'm glad to be here. I'm sorry I'm late. I have a couple of things going on, and we had a little fall with my dad this afternoon about 6:30, right when I was supposed to jump on, so I had to attend to that.
Thanks for joining us. I think the concept of experiencing racism, I know Lisa, or I mean, as broadly as you can use that term, had said she started experiencing it after her discovery. I know, my sons experienced that, knowing that thinking that their mom was biracial and they were quarter African American. And then once they found out they were Jewish, even one of their friends made some offhanded comments about them having a Jew mom, and some very racist remarks about money and me and his friends. So I'm curious if any of you else, Lisa mentioned it too, have experienced racism now after your MPE journey in a way that you hadn't experienced it before.
The most I experienced was, my friends know that I am now more Hispanic than I was before, and they just ask me, "Hey, do you even feel worse of a Mexican because now you're like almost 100% Hispanic and you don't speak any Spanish?" That's about as worst as I've experienced, but I just thought it was a little goofy.
Mine's pretty steady my whole life. Nothing changed for me. So that was.
Spencer, do you mind me asking what your story is?
Sure. If you don't, yeah, I'll try to make it quick because I'm long-winded. But my journey started 4 years ago. I started to look up my family tree as a gift to my mother's side of the family. I'm very close with my mother's side of the family, and I wanted to give that gift to my children. My wife is from Barcelona, Spain, and we were living there at the time, and they do this thing where they do a family book where they actually keep a list of their family tree. It's not a legal document, but it's something that everybody has. If you were to go and have a child in a hospital, they ask for your family book to write the name of your children in your book. So they have a pretty living record that everybody pretty much holds on to. So I got kind of jealous and said I'll do the same thing for my side of the family. And my story really quickly was, my mother had me when she was 17. She raised me by herself. When I became aware as a young child that my father wasn't around, I had a stepfather around. He was the father figure in my life. But I would spend a lot of time with one of my really close cousins for the summer, but his father was always in his life. So of course I started questioning what a father was. I knew my stepfather wasn't my father. So my mother introduced me to a gentleman and said, "This is your father." I was about the age of 9. And we didn't connect at all. It was very weird. But his wife and I connected really well, and we've stayed friends to this point. But he and I struggled with him trying to connect. Of course, when if you grow up without a father and then you meet your father later in life, when you're cognitive of that, you tend to romanticize your father. And I never got that from him. That caused a lot of unsettledness between us. And when I got to the age of 18, I finally gave up on trying to connect with him and just kind of walked away from it. So I went my whole life knowing he was out there, but not sharing my life with him. When I got married, I didn't share it with him. When I had kids, I didn't share that with him. I just he's out there. Again, fast forward back to living in Spain and seeing how my wife's family did things. I decided to do my family research. And of course, it was a bit frustrating at first because there are not a lot of records for African Americans, and it took a while to figure things out. And then the DNA test came out, and I decided to take it to see if that could help me along. And that's when I discovered that my father, who I wasn't connected with, was not my father. I confronted my mother. She told me a story about another gentleman. I looked him up on Facebook, and by chance he had a profile, and I looked at him. It was me 20 years in the future. So that blew my mind. And so that's where I'm at now. But also in my journey, I realized that my mother's father is not her father. So I call it a double NPE. And of course, to make matters worse, my mother's number 10 of 14 kids. So it's like, what happened? Where's that story coming from? Of course, we all adore our grandparents. We don't want to think badly of our grandmother, but I think it's brought some shame to the family, my detective work. So that's caused a rift in my family that's kind of got me blacklisted to a certain point. But we were talking about names and changing names earlier, and I wanted to chime in on that. My last name is Warren, which is my mother's maiden last name, which is her father's last name, but I'm technically not a Warren. So the bottom kind of fell out where growing up as a child, I was a Warren and that's all I had. That was my name. That was me holding on to something. That was an identity. When we talk about our racial identity and so forth, that was my identity. To find out that I'm technically not a Warren just kind of blows the whole thing up even more so. I've never wanted to change my name to my biological father's last name. I've just never wanted to change my name, and anybody else who wants to, I understand it. I applaud them. I just have never felt that connection to that point of wanting to change my name. I've just held on to Warren, to a man I never met. He passed away before I was born. He passed away a year before I was born, but still, that's my connection to this.
Do you mind me asking, do you struggle with the fact that you're attached to a name of a man that you have no clue who he is?
No, I'm not. And one thing I've learned in this whole journey, listening to other people's stories over these past 4 years and sharing mine, family can be blood, but family is really who you choose to love and who chooses to love you back. So if I was adopted and a family took me in, I would probably not ever being adopted. So I can only speak from a perspective of guessing. So please don't let me offend anybody here. But that would be my family because they chose to love me and take care of me. If I was born to a family and my parents were abusive, that's still my family. And those are the knocks that you take. That's who I am. That experience has made me.
Snaps all the way around for that one from Spencer over there.
But I mean, I have friends that I consider family. I have family that I don't even care for very much, but blood doesn't do it. DNA connects us genetically, and there's a difference between a genetic family and real family. So that's the way I look at it.
Tiana, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think it was Stephanie that wants to add something. Stephanie.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hi, Stephanie.
How are you? So I know a bunch of you. I didn't put my name up only because there are a couple people that I haven't had conversations with. So I'm leaving the last names out on purpose. I did not have an ethnicity surprise on the Chinese side. So Chinese mother. I did have a surprise a couple of years ago when, hey, you go to take the test because there's a promo and you get the test. There's nothing that matches. And then a man tracked me down at my office, called me incessantly on a work cell and a work landline and dropped that bomb on me. And it did not go well. Basically, I mean, I won't tell the whole long story, but it really did not go well. And there's 3 generations of NPEs in this family, one above me and one below me, the generation after, but it has not gone well. But I wanted to mention about the birth certificate because I was always called after the birth, the father that I grew up with, Stephanie, okay? My mother told a little white lie when I went to get a passport. So I had a lot of problems getting a passport because on my birth certificate, it's conveniently blank under father. So I went my whole life as that paternal name. Had to get documentation just to get a passport. all because of her little white lies, right? To prove that I was this man's daughter, to just to get a passport, only to get this call at age 47. So there are times that I'm tempted to just go by what's on my birth certificate because it doesn't have either one of them. It's blank. It's blank. Who's your daddy? So that is really all the lies coming in place, really falling into place. But it's also out of respect that I don't. Because the dad I grew up with that wasn't even on there, he didn't know. He didn't know. And he just passed away, everybody. That's my heart.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I was protecting him. That's who I was protecting. Amazing, amazing writer. Buddhist hippie guy. Amazing writer. He did not know. I'm going through his writings and he didn't know. And he and I were like this. So I'm going through he's so literary. And you should see his script. It looks like, old English script, yet he was the hippie. But he didn't know. And every single thing in the writing shows that he didn't know. And that's who I was protecting. So I really think that family knows that they really probably shouldn't speak to me because I don't have any desire to speak with them. It really didn't go well. And that's what happened. They really pretty much, the bio father did not respect my wishes, was pretty intrusive, and I don't want to associate with him. So, it didn't go well. Yeah. So, but part of the reason why I felt it was important to be here was to really back up a lot of you, because I have been, and as those of you who are friends with me know, I've been speaking up about biracial issues my whole life. And so I've always been the biracial Chinese one, and I've gotten it from every side. Someone think I'm Native, someone thinking I'm Cabo Verde, someone thinking I'm Filipina, Hawaiian. Let's see, you run down the list. I mean, it's a long list. I am Chinese, and I'm white, and I am a woman of color. But I get bashed from every direction, everyone. So, it is a name issue and a little bit of a pride issue. So that's still a question mark. Do I just go by the one last name that's on the birth certificate and that's under my mother, and then just leave it? But still, out of respect, I haven't done that. I've been pondering, but I don't really know if I will. So that's the little mix over on this end. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm so sorry for your loss. My birth certificate father passed away a few months ago too. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was the big one. This is important. That's why I'm pretty much making sure that people know, this is the big one. Don't tread on it at all.
Yeah. I was really lucky when I did tell my birth certificate father, because I have a really bad poker face and I needed his support to get through this. And he just said, it doesn't change anything. You're still my daughter. And he said, Jewish, black, doesn't matter. They're both oppressed peoples. Won't be any different. Anyway.
That's such an important point too for the donor conception community and for adoptees also, because parents that go into the journey, like knowing that their child has another biological parent or other biological parents, there's such a feeling of, obviously not everyone, but so many people are worried about like allegiances almost, like I want my child, they want to be loved as the parent, and the phrase we kind of come out with a lot is like, love is not pie. There's not like a finite amount. Like if you have 4 parents and they are all listed on your birth certificate and it's open and you can contact any of them, you love all of them. You love the people who gave you life. I would love my biological father no matter who he was. And he happens to be a very nice man. But I would love him regardless for being a part of who I am intrinsically. But I also, and the dad that raised me, there's a lot of issues there, but there's absolutely no way that he's not daddy. We can love 2 fathers, we can love 2 mothers, we can love more than 2 parents, more than two fathers even, there's step parents. There's so many different family arrangements now, and we can love, and it's just, I think what we want is all of them to be acknowledged, where it's not just the parents who raise you, and it's not just your biological parents. When we're in these complex situations, you really realize that we're all such a mix of nature and nurture. Maybe some of us through this experience realize that nature is more profound than we may have previously thought, but you realize that there is that complex mix, and we're kind of all experiments about it, and that everybody plays a part in our lives, just like people can have more than two children and people have more than one friend.
Absolutely. I have a lot of people wanting to speak. I'm going to go ahead and let Tiana, she raised her hand to say something. Do you still want to have something to say, Tiana?
No, why don't you go ahead and I was actually just putting a thumbs up for Cassandra. Why don't you let the other fellow who said he wanted to speak.
Jason, you had something to say?
Yeah, one thing I didn't really go into or mention is my birth certificate father, on changing the name thing is, I've never had a relationship with him. Him and my mom split when I was 4. And, he has a lot of mental disabilities going on. And, I would see him and hear from him, maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years. So I've never had a good connection with him. And within the past couple years, we've experienced some really difficult things. He's kind of pushed me away a lot with the way he treats me and all that stuff. So it's just, that's why in my story, I don't talk about my birth certificate father so much, because he was he's who I thought was my dad for 34 years. And, something recently happened, and it just showed me how much, I still care for him a lot. And he's never not going to be my dad, because that's who I thought he was, even though he wasn't always here for me, but it's just, that connection of calling him father or dad was never, I did it out of respect, but it just was never like a huge connection for me.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. So I just wanted to mention that. So
Spencer, did you have something else? I know we're getting over on time. I'd love to keep chatting for a few more minutes. And Spencer, you had something?
This is going to sound a little off because I can't get my thoughts together, but I was going to talk on the question earlier, Colton, about privilege. Mm-hmm. And things that are going on currently in our country and so forth. There's a lot of conversation going on and talking about race and privilege and so forth. I've always said that people will treat you to what they perceive you to be. So if they think you're Black, they're going to treat you like a Black person. They would treat a Black person. Or if they think you are for transgender, if they think you're a male, they're going to treat you how they think a male should be treated. That's how they perceive you. So I don't think privilege is something that some people can take it as their advantage because they know it and they use it, but most people kind of react to how the world treats them. So if you live I lived in Spain for a long time, and I always say this is funny to me. Most people don't get it at first, but I wasn't African American in Spain. I wasn't Black. I was just American. So they treated me like an American, how they perceived Americans to be. They know I spoke English, but they also knew I spoke Spanish. They also knew I coached soccer, football, whatever. And they knew I wanted to be a part of the culture, and they accepted me in this small coastal Mediterranean town that I lived in. Now, if I left that town and nobody knew me, they saw my skin color and they treated me what they thought I was. And no one knew what I was because my DNA I've got so many different things inside of me. I identify as being African-American here in this country. But when I was in Spain, no one knew what I was. So they didn't know how to treat me. So they didn't know to discriminate against me because they didn't know what I was. And I just thought that was hilarious. So in the sense of and I can't speak for someone who lives in America who's identified with being white and find out that they are part African American, and then they were to identify as being biracial. I can't speak for them, never being a white person, but just speaking out that if people think you're one way, they're going to treat you one way, and you're going to deal with it that way, and that's going to build your character. I don't even know if this makes sense. People shake your heads if this is starting to make a little sense to anybody. But it's just funny that privilege is not something that we wear like a coat because we choose it. It's the way the world treats us, and that coat gets put on us, if that concept makes sense.
Yeah, can I just touch on that? Because Spencer made a good point, because when you said, Colton, about privilege, I think of that as well. And when I found out I was half Black, my privilege didn't change. But I think that the fact that I'm aware of it, that's a whole, I mean, that means the world of a difference. I mean, the fact that I'm aware of it, I wasn't aware of it before. You know what I mean? But now I am aware of it, and I keep it in check, you know, and it helps me explain and educate other people about what privilege is, because I didn't lose my privilege, and I know that.
But also that privilege could have, you became aware of it by the character of the person you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a lot of people who don't have this discovery, who think
Right.
they're 100% white, who still don't see their privilege per se.
Right. And you know what? I have to carry the burden of having more privilege than half of my family. And I tell people that all the time. That's for me to carry. So, you know, I take racism very seriously, and especially when I get it from all sides, and Cara, and, you know, very similar situations. But that's a burden I have to take, you know, and I take that very seriously, and I'm very conscious of that.
So I feel like this is going to be, this could be the right group of people to have an opinion on a question like this. But, you know, Spencer, you were saying there are lots of conversations happening around dinner tables across the country right now surrounding race. Mm-hmm. How do we, in your opinions, how do we bridge the gaps between our different cultures that are in this country, that make up this country?
Hey, Colton, can I have Giovanna answer that question, because that is right up her alley and with her nonprofit?
Whoever wants to
sign. Giovanna?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first. Oh, am I unmuted now?
No,
okay,
my
sorry.
bad.
That's okay. So the first thing I would say is doing exactly what we're doing is having dialogue about race. I think that we get so caught up in, you know, depending on how you were raised. And I think, you know, definitely in my own household, being growing up thinking that I was part white, you're taught not to have conversations about race and religion, right? Those are the two things I think most households, when you're at least certain generations, I know my generation, you're taught, you don't talk about these things. You don't talk about things that could be taboo or offensive. And I think now, you know, it's good to see people having those conversations, but I think the first thing is that people need to get past the fear of saying the wrong thing. You know, I have so many conversations with people in what I do where they wanted to speak out, for instance, on Black Lives Matter to show support, but they were afraid. Meanwhile, you have your Black friends, for instance, that desperately want you to say something, to acknowledge what's happening, even if they say something that might be slightly the wrong thing, but you want them to acknowledge it. So I think just as a start, being able to have those conversations and being open to having them, whether you're sharing your own experiences or listening to others' experiences, and being able to be okay with not knowing what to say, but being able to listen.
I think as an MPE too, whose ethnicity changes, it's really hard. And that's one of the reasons we created the Cross-Cultural Connections Facebook group, because you have questions and you're embarrassed to ask them, and you don't want people to think you're being racist with those questions. I mean, I didn't actually meet my dad's side of the family until I was 7 years old, really. And I went over there and I was like, does your color rub off? And it was an innocent question of a child who had never been around a Black person before, just around my white side of my family. And it's those sort of questions that you don't have a racist meaning behind them, but you're embarrassed to ask. And they're so important for MPEs whose cultures change, because we want to learn about our new cultures and we want to experience in them. And we don't want to put our foots in our mouth, but we also want to learn. And so that's why I think the Facebook group Cross Cultural Connections is really important, so people can ask those questions without the fear of being misinterpreted. We come at it with everybody's asking with an open heart and with love first. And so that's
right.
why it's good. Yeah.
And being able to be in a safe space to be able to do that, as opposed to being out in public, because you don't always want to be asking people of different ethnicities to educate you. You know, you want to be in a safe space where those people feel welcomed to and feel safe to, and safe to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Jacqueline, did you have something you wanted to add?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. My story is much different, I think. I've listened to so many stories, I'm thrown off now. I took a DNA test after my husband had taken one. I had no interest in taking a DNA test. I knew who I was. I knew who my parents were. And I kept watching my husband being excited because he's African American. And one day the light bulb went on and I just thought, you know, I'm going to take a DNA test for the heck of it. I know my grandmother came from Ireland on my mom's side. And when I took it, I was totally sideswiped. After 52 years, I realized my father wasn't my biological father. And I actually just wrote about it, and I kept writing and writing. Before I knew it, I published a book. And I put myself in therapy, and my ethnicity, I was no longer the nationalities I thought I was. I was 1 out of 3, and plus some. But I felt like I got robbed of being who I was meant to be. I remember as a child asking my father why I didn't look like him. And they always threw it over on, you look like your aunt. It's very hard for me to talk about. To be honest, I'm still traumatized over it. Not totally, the writing and publishing my book really helped a lot, but it's still a lot for me to cope with because I feel like I missed so much. I met 2 of my cousins and they look like me. And now I can relate that I look like someone else. And my family got upset and they're so mad over the book, over me writing the book. And they don't talk about it to me. My mother, I love my mother still. But for 2 years we didn't talk, and I can't sit down and ask her about him. It's like the silent generation that she lived, and now she's old, and I don't want to do that to her. But it's very hard. And like now I know I'm Italian, and there's so much I missed out on. I just really have a hard time struggling. It's a struggle to find out that your life was, you're not who you thought, or you are who you thought you were, but you're not. And I guess I just wanted to tell my story. It's tough. It's tough, especially when I didn't see it coming. And my father, who I thought was my father, was never there. I never got a birthday card. I always thought it was strange, but I just didn't think that something could go on for 52 years and never know it. So I believed he was my father.
I think what Franz said in his video about you knew, underneath you knew. I think, how many of you guys, you didn't know, but you knew? Yeah.
I didn't. I didn't know though. I mean, when I asked him why I didn't look like him, I believed him. So I really didn't know. That DNA test really threw me off. Even when I saw that I was 0% German and I was Italian, I still looked through thinking, okay, well, my father's olive skin, and tried to figure out where they went wrong accidentally. So I still.
Well, I hope you'll join us in Cross-Cultural Connections, because that's a safe place to share without guilt or fear. And we love hearing from everybody there. Colton, did you have anything else you wanted to ask before we wrap up?
I did. I just wanted to ask one final question to the room. And I also wanted to touch on something, Spencer, that you said beautifully when you were talking about how family isn't always blood. And I think everyone senses that. But in this group right here, and in finding, support groups and finding resources online, do you feel like you guys have found a whole new family in situations like this? Show of hands.
Can I chime in here?
Yes.
Yes, I do feel like the community itself has been helpful. I'm at a place right now where I feel like I want to take a step back because my bio dad is on the sites and we're having a little turbulence in our relationship right now. But one thing that's missing for me in the resources is mental health directories, and trying to find speciality in the mental health field for NPE issues. And then, of course, the subset of MPE donor-conceived issues as well. So that's something that I'm hoping that a lot of the groups that I've been involved with will be touching on in the future. And it's sorely needed. Not only the who is doing what and who has the specialty in connecting people with that specific specialty, but the training, the curricula, what is the associations doing? What are the accreditation standards? All of these issues. I'm writing my dissertation specific to this topic. I am assessing 6 different disciplines of mental health professionals: psychiatrists, psychologists, genetic counselors, master's prepared therapists, social workers. I may be missing one, but they all come at these issues from a different tact. And so if we had more training for them, I feel it's something that I'm really hoping Right to Know will be able to work on with me about. I think that this would be a really good entry point to helping solve a lot of our challenges as a community. Thank you.
Definitely. Spencer, were you? Say something. Oh.
I had a comment,
yeah, please.
if I may. I found the community to be incredibly helpful along my way until I got to a point. And when I really started unpacking all of my feelings around the ethnicity piece of it for me, I got to a point where I really backed off. And I will admit that part of it got triggered because I encountered a couple people who really tore into me and tried to shame me for some of my feelings.
Hey, Debbie, I don't think you're talking about our group, though.
I'm not. I am not. I should have clarified that. I'm sorry. It was not. But I think that because my situation was maybe even a little more, I don't know if it was more unique, but the uniqueness of how I felt about some of the things with my particular situation and some of the nuances of it. And I know I've spoken to a few of you, so I know a few of you know exactly where I'm coming from with it, but I just felt like it was so unique and I had a particular perspective on it. I felt like very few people quite got where I was coming from. So I felt like I got to this particular place with it where it was difficult for anybody to get where I was coming from. So I ended up back in this place where I felt more isolated. And because the family I grew up with, I'm so disconnected from and always have been. And then my bio family has zero interest in getting to know me. it just made me feel even more isolated. So I backed off a lot. And I know that, you know, we can't address everybody's needs, and there's so many variations through this whole journey. You know, it's just difficult. It's difficult to address everybody's needs. So I don't know, that was just my experience. I don't know how do we make sure, you know, everybody's needs get met in a way that can make everybody feel safe. I don't know, but I'm just offering my perspective for the sake of feedback, not in any way for any kind of criticism, but just for the sake of feedback.
Rejection is definitely difficult to process. I'm with you, Debbie, since my biological family doesn't want contact with me as well. I understand. Stephanie, you have something to add?
Just really along that line for Debbie, because in some ways I'm in a similar boat. You know, there are, let's just put it bluntly, it is race and politics that is exactly why there is a complete divide with the bio family, and their behavior of a couple of individuals. Don't want to have anything to do with that. I have been speaking up my whole life, so that's not anything new. It's just a different white dad. But because mine is still different, you still do reach that point. So I understand where what Debbie's saying. We have a lot of nuances. I think what would really help each other is everybody speak up a little bit more, you know, and everybody needs a little bit more compassion in this situation. So just maybe take that extra step and, you know, say something that is warm and maybe nurturing to the other person. I think everybody could do a little bit more of that. And that's just really my general recommendation, because everybody can feel very isolated in this situation at one point or another. Like just really being a little more vocal, and let's just back each other up more.
Exactly. I agree with you. That's what we're hoping that in our group, that we'll be able to do more of that and have feature chat, Stephanie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I think we're going to wrap up.
Yeah.
We've been on for a couple hours. That's about as long as my bottom can handle for a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Thank you, Colton. Alicia, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to dovetail on what Giovanna and Stephanie and Debbie was alluding to also in regards to the cross-cultural connections group. You know, we started it just for that reason, to make a really safe space for everybody to be able to come and voice concerns that are going on in their lives due to their MPE status. This is our very first Zoom we've ever done. I just want you guys to know, and I want to thank every one of you for showing up. It was a fabulous conversation. I appreciate Charlene being here and Colton. We're going to do another one probably in about a month. We're inviting a psychotherapist, and also one of our board members, Tia, who's here, is also going to be speaking. We'll be discussing more on donor conceived. Everybody who spoke, thank you so much for what you said. And it was just so touching. I was almost in tears actually listening to some of your guys' conversations. Thank you very much. And I hope everybody looks for me on the Facebook groups, and I'll be looking for you.
Spencer, you wanted to add something?
This is just a side note. I put this out here because I do this for all my friends. If you want a safe space to talk about anything, you can reach out to me. You can find me. I am one person that offers myself to give you a perspective, to hear your questions. I can't speak for my whole entire group of people, but I can speak for myself. This is all love. I just give it out to anybody out there. If you want to find me, you can find me. I'm out there. Okay?
I wanted to mention one last thing that I have to really give kudos to some people that really do great stuff in our groups. We have Laura Leslie and one of her partners, Ashley. I don't know if she's on here or not, but yeah, there she is. She's on the bottom. They're angels. They're search angels. So if anybody knows anybody that needs help finding their a genetic family member, they're the ones to talk to. And we also have other groups, Colton, that we kind of partner with. One of them is called as a discovery group. I think Aaron is left for now, but Aaron is one of those that hosts that, and Jody Piles. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. That's it, you guys. I hope you guys have a good night. I know it's really late on the East Coast, so we're gonna let you guys go.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for
Seriously.
having us.
Thank you. We see Spike, our photographer who's over here, and Charlene, you can't see her, she's down there, but seriously, what we're doing, we have unearthed a whole world that we didn't realize was out there. And I think what I want to do and what Charlene wants to do and what Spike wants to do is we want to create content that makes people stop and think to themselves, you know, oh, I never really thought about it like that before. And some of the things that you all said tonight, you nailed it. So I appreciate you guys for letting us do this.
Well, thank you for Colton for being here with us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so good to see you guys again.
Yeah, good to see everybody too.
All right, Vic. By the time I got on there, I broke down.
Well, your mother was speaking in early.
Huh?
Your mother